Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone. We are now in public session, and just to remind you, this meeting will be broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings, and so welcome to those who are watching us online. Okay, so if you can ensure your mobile phones are muted, and I'm going to proceed with the agenda. So we have apologies from Anya, we have late apologies from Carol. I know she's caught up with some issues in her constituency, and I think Stuart will join time permitting. We are expecting Timothy, and I'm sure he'll arrive at some stage, but we'll proceed. Okay, any declarations of interest to declare, members? No? Okay, so just chairperson's business, just two small items. First of all, safeguarding board. So following the second session of our trauma-informed approach to training with the safeguarding board last week, I would like to formally write to the safeguarding board to thank them for their work with the committee. So I'm just seeking your agreement that that letter can be drafted and sent on behalf of the committee.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, it's not a small matter, but I do want to draw reference to the recent disorder across Northern Ireland. I welcome that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, along with their executive colleagues, have issued a letter calling for calm and condemning. And I just wanted to sort of remind members how important our wider work within this committee around calling for the review of TBUC and the new strategy that come forward in terms of the blending of good relations and race relations, the draft refugee integration strategy, the race relations order, and what was the other one there written down, the new racial equality strategy itself. So I think that there's something we may have to revisit sooner rather than later in terms of that piece. But I think our thoughts at the minute are all with the family of the alleged victim and the victim herself. And just wondered, did anybody else want to say a few words at this point? Go ahead, please, Brian.
No, Chair, no, thank you for raising this topic. Certainly, I welcome the statement from the Executive issued this morning, the Executive as a whole, and I think we can all concur with the wording in that, and absolutely concerned for the victim of the sexual assault, but deep concern for how that has been misused and for racial hate crime in parts of the province. Sadly, last night, after being at the football match, and again this morning, I'm visiting families in Ballysena where homes and cars were attacked. But I was encouraged by speaking to residents generally in the area and their abhorrence of these attacks and their support for the ethnic minority families living among them. Typically in those households, where there were a couple, and the husband and the wife are both working. Maybe the husband might be working two jobs. The children are attending local school. That's just a common situation I find, and it's just appalling that they don't feel safe. That some, and clearly there's orchestration behind this. They've been planning, some seizing on an opportunity, but I am encouraged by the general support. The vast majority of people are utterly abhorred by these, and we don't conflate the two issues of the right to protest and also the right. People have concerns about immigration policy and all those issues, but violence and attacks on people from who are foreign nationals are utterly repugnant and must be condemned across society. There's no place for that. So I'm glad you have raised that matter. I'm sure we will record, perhaps we could record our support for the Executive statement, if all agree. I know if the SDLP are content, if you've had time to look at the statement. And community cohesion comes under our committee. It's not just all about strategies, though. It's all right having strategies and documents about work on the ground, and about public messages, and for everyone to play their part, in making clear their condemnation of violence and creating victims of innocent people.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Claire, you'd like to say something, please?
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate the opportunity to have a say in relation to this, and concur very much with what Brian had said in relation to it, and really appreciate his comments in particular. I suppose what I would come back to as well, and it very much as the remit of this work, is again the work around ending violence against women and girls, and really what more we can do to encourage the Executive Office to reaffirm that and step up any work that we're doing in relation to this and the resources that we're putting into this piece of work. Because sadly, this it's a generational change to an extent to address this, but things are ongoing, and we're seeing this, not least with, the alleged offence that took place here, but right across Northern Ireland that's taking place even more quietly. So if there's something more that even as a committee that we can do to really affirm the work in relation to ending violence against women and girls, I think that would be important at this stage.
Thank you, Claire. It's my fault. I totally missed that in my opening remarks there, but I totally agree. I wonder if we'll take a few more comments and then we can maybe think about what we could do as a committee. Go ahead, please, Sinead.
Just once again outline my comments to those that have already been spoken around the committee. It's dreadful, the pictures that we're seeing on social media. It's just terrifying for those people that are living there, and it's a very confined area in Ballymena, and I really feel for those that are caught in this, and we as a committee have a very, very significant role in and around the ending violence against women and girls, but also about race relations and how communities work together, and I think we're all leaders in our own communities, and we have to use that very privileged position that we have been given to ensure that we don't cause harm, and that there should be no conflating any of these issues at all. When we see the violence on our streets, we need to call it out, and I think I really appreciate that the PSNI also the work that they have done in the past few nights, and they've taken significant casualties in and around that. But I appreciate their press release in relation just calling it racism. We have to call it as we see it, and that's what it is. And in fact, the fact that they, the victim's family wanted a peaceful protest, and actually, other women and girls are now victims as a result of how this has affected the communities. I feel really sorry for the good people of Ballymena as well that don't want this done in their name, and unfortunately there are those that are just intent on getting into the streets and creating havoc. So the sooner we see the cessation of all of this, the better, and then we can get back to the issues that are really still at hand that we all have to deal with, and this committee has a significant remit in that as well, around T-Buck, and everybody knows how I feel about T-Buck as well. It's just, in many ways it's quite ineffective when you see what's happening here.
Thank you. Appreciate you arrived late. We're obviously just reflecting on under Chairperson's business. I opened up by welcoming the joint statement from the Executive, but if you want to say a few words really just in terms of how it reflects in our committee's work.
Apologies for being late. It was round with the education. We had ones in that was speaking to that were touring the building. They're here at work experience for 3 days, so that's apologies, Chair, for being late. So just reflecting in Ballymena, violence is wrong, racism is wrong, and the thuggery we have seen over the last couple of nights in Ballymena is not reflective of the people of Ballymena. I joined with, I think, between 1,500 and 2,000 people on Monday night at the peaceful protest to stand with the family of the young girl that there's the sexual crime happened against. People were there and have legitimate concerns to be there. But what has marred that and what has taken place since has obscured the concerns that people have. I have no problem calling out that the violence should never have happened, but it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now, because this is doing nothing for Ballymena, and this is doing nothing for the cause, for the issues that I have been highlighting since I come to this chamber regarding immigration and different things. And this is very much counterproductive. But one thing I would say is that downplaying it and some of the snidey remarks within the chamber, and indeed, I was called a racist a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this in the chamber, is downplaying the concerns that exist out there. One thing I would say is that the policies we have at the minute, whether it's ending violence against women or girls, or the money, the vast amount of money we're spending in immigration and integration, isn't working. it's not working, and we really need to go back to the drawing board and look at how we're targeting how this money's being spent. The end of violence against women and girls is the big one here because it relates to the offence that has been caused. We have seen money given out to councils and the piecemeal that has been coming back as a real scattergun approach of how, you know, different councils are looking and spending that money. TEO needs to get a handle on this essentially and have a policy that when we are giving out any of this, any money for grant aid, if it's to councils or groups, we're very clear the criteria that you have to meet, and I believe we have failed in that. I seen the press release from the First Minister, and yes, she has called for an end to the violence, but I don't think she's in any place, given the years of what's happened within her party. She's hypocritical and calling out violence now, because ultimately what I've seen over the last number of days on social media is that people upcasting about there's no alternative. There's always been an alternative to violence. There's an alternative to violence in Ballymena over the last 2 nights, and there's an alternative to violence 50 years ago in this province.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. I'm just wondering, how are you content that Brian... Yeah, okay. Okay, members, so thank you for that. I thought that was important. We all got an opportunity to speak to that. First of all, I am very conscious of the PSNI, the role that they have played in this, and a few of us have mentioned that, and I just wonder, is there maybe a letter from this committee to go and thank them for their work and to express our not sympathies, but our regret that frontline officers have been injured. But I think the wider issue is around the Executive Office in terms of how they go forward. The learning from last summer, which we have not seen the fallout from yet. We asked for a swift review and it never happened. But this is another very similar set of incidents. And when will the next one be? In 6 months, a year from now, and we need to make sure that our policies are fit for purpose, our strategies are actually delivering. So I wonder, should we be writing? Well, the First and Deputy First Minister are coming shortly, aren't they? I wonder if that
25th of June.
25th of June. So it might be something we look at, but I wonder if there's something more formal in terms of writing to the department that we ask for a response around how ending violence against women and girls, good relations, racial equality, etc., how these are all knitted together so that we can actually tackle the root causes.
Just on the police, it's obviously very disappointing that so many officers have been hurt. As I say, I was on the ground on Monday night and I was speaking to the Superintendent, Jerry McGrath, directly. Yes, he has come out calling for political leadership and people to condemn the violence, which I have no problem with. But during a phone call I had with him on Monday night, his comments to me were, "You've had your moment, you've had your BBC coverage, and you'll likely get the headlines in Nolan in the morning." So that's how the police service looked upon the peaceful protest on Monday night, and I trust Mr McGrath will reflect on the words in the conversation he had with me on Monday night, and he'll deal with this differently in future.
Okay, but just in the broader focus then, broader context of what happened and the number of police officers, are people content that we write to the head of the PSNI?
Yep.
Okay, and also write to the Executive Office and ask for them to come back to us around how they're going to try and knit together so that, and as we find here, the different directorates in many ways work in silos, so it's really about how they're going to knit some of this work together.
I think it's okay, writing to the PSNI and indicating, our concerns about the injuries that have actually happened as well. But I think in the letter we need to indicate that we need a robust response and people that are committing these crimes in plain sight need to be brought before the courts as soon as possible. I think, we've seen that play out in other race riots in England where the perpetrators were brought before the courts and were dealt with very harshly, and I think we need that type of a response from the PSNI. I think it's not good enough to go well done and all of that. I think we must demand a robust response and people brought before the justice system.
Okay, so just recap on that a bit. I wonder, should we ask the clerk and the assistant clerk to draft something that we can circulate and get agreement on. Go ahead, please, Timothy.
Yeah, just one final comment on the police, and this is something the Chief Constable has outlined a number of times regarding resources. I think Monday night laid bare the lack of resources the PSNI have, and that was part of the problem that led to the disorder on Monday night being able to spread, that the police were not able to get a handle on. I watched footage from last night where in Lawrence Street people were wrecking houses, and there was 4 Land Rovers drove up and down the street, didn't go out, didn't engage. So I think there's a severe lack of police. And yes, the PSNI have come out and called for condemnation from politicians, no problem with that. But the police are the only body now that can bring this to an end. And I think they need to be resourced appropriately going forward to make sure that they can get a handle on this issue and bring it to an end, and bring it to an end swiftly.
Okay, well, I think there was more money today under the comprehensive spending review, so that'll be up to the executive and the justice in terms of how that feeds in. Is that okay? Maybe it's probably a bit of a priority, if that's okay, guys, given the sensitivities of the issue. Go ahead, please, Brian, then we're moving on.
Yeah, I appreciate not all members are in parties represented in the executive, but I had suggested and proposed that we record our support for the statement from the executive. I don't know if members have had a chance to look at it.
I haven't seen it.
That was issued this morning. Maybe if you want to have a wee look at it, we'll come back to that.
I haven't looked at it either. I was in
I
committee.
think it was sent at 11 o'clock or so
Find it on
this morning. Or I can read it here, or if you want to have a look at it. Will I read it out, or give members a chance to look at it?
Give them chance. We'll maybe
Yeah.
come back to it under any other business. Would that give time?
Just given the seriousness, and I think we need to be calling for the violence to end. And I think,
Yes.
I think we should align ourselves with that. But also, I'm content with the wording in the statement.
Yes.
Just suggesting that we express our support for it.
Okay. Not to bounce other members into it, we'll come back to it. We'll make some progress and then we'll come back to it. But thank you, Brian, for that suggestion. Okay, members, moving on then. So draft minutes, we'll find these in pages 6 to 14 of your pack. I'm just asking, are you content that these are a true reflection of proceedings? Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and sign those. So there's no matters arising. So members, we're now going to go into closed session, please. Thank you.
Okay. So we are now back in open session, and the chair has had to leave due to committee business in London tomorrow, and so I am chairing the remainder of the meeting. And our next matter is a briefing on the Assembly Research Information Services (AREA's) paper on trauma-informed approach in the context of victims and survivors. So we welcome to the meeting Annabel, Reid, Senior Research Officer from REAS, and refer matter members to pages 139 to 140 of the pack for the Clerk's brief and pages 141 to 179 for the REAS paper. Annabel, if you're ready, if you want to talk us through the paper, yes. and then we'll take a note of any questions.
So good afternoon, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak to you today about trauma-informed approaches. So I know the committee has already had some sessions on the topic as part of your preparation for the Truth Recovery Bill. So the paper in your pack gives you some background on what a trauma-informed approach is, but today I'm going to focus mainly on the case studies that are within that paper. Just to explain, the paper was written by another Assembly researcher, Michael Gregg, so he wasn't available today, so I'm just stepping in to kind of cover some of the key points and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. So Michael has also asked me just to thank some of the operational staff who work on similar schemes in other jurisdictions who give up their time to talk to us and provide some information for this paper. So to summarise and recap the theory behind trauma-informed approaches, there are 3 broad principles: do no harm, reduce the risk of re-traumatisation, and empower victims and survivors with dignity, choice and support. So the case studies in this paper offer important lessons and show how that theory plays out in practice. And I'm going to talk about two redress schemes. One you're very familiar with, the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme in the Republic of Ireland, and the other one is the Australia's National Redress Scheme. So my colleague Thomas Luff has briefed you previously on Scotland's Redress for Survivors scheme, and the paper also contains a case study for you to read through on that as well. So the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme in Ireland was set up in 2023 and started taking applications in March last year. Now, there's been a number of design decisions made within that scheme which have the clear intent of avoiding re-traumatising victims and survivors. So the first one is limiting the use of oral testimony. That means people who apply to the scheme don't have to speak in person about what happened to them. Instead, most applications are based on documents like records from the institutions or birth and medical records. This helps reduce distress and keeps the process simple and respectful. And oral testimony is viewed as the last resort in terms of assessing eligibility. So what the literature on adopting a trauma-informed approach recommends is offering choice. So people who want to tell their story can still do so. And if a person chooses to give evidence in person, mechanisms are in place to support that. So rather than a formal hearing room, they can choose a safe, familiar environment. And likewise, they can also bring someone they trust, be it a support worker, a friend, or a family member to come along. So, although the scheme avoids using oral testimony to reduce distress, accessing records can also be an emotionally charged process for survivors. And to help with this, survivors don't need to produce the original documents. Just the name of the institution and approximate dates they were there is enough for that initial application. And the scheme's institutional records searches service can help gather the records either by getting consent or with the help of a support person. Again, the focus is on providing choice and support throughout the process. So this scheme has also learned from others that came before it. Previously, there was the Magdalene Commission scheme, which opened in 2013, and the Ombudsman later did a report into it and identified a number of issues, one of which was the long delays in processing applications, and this was especially evident from women who had additional support needs or limited legal or decision-making capacity. So the main criticisms there was that the scheme didn't make it easy for others to apply on their behalf, and that led to long waits for support and payments. And I'm sure you can imagine, in what is already quite a vulnerable group, those delays can lead to increased distress. In the more recent scheme, those lessons have been taken on board, and there are now rules that allow someone else, like a legal guardian or family member, to apply on behalf of a person if they can't do so themselves. Nevertheless, the redress scheme has faced criticism itself, including challenges in court. So the scheme's criteria excludes children, now adults, who stayed for less than 180 days in one of these institutions. And looking at the guidance on trauma-informed care, this rule would go against those key principles, as even short stays can cause lifelong trauma. So I know the committee has previously heard how developmental neuroscience shows early separation can be deeply impactful. So further criticism of the scheme comes from some survivors and victims who describe their experience as bureaucratic and lacking in empathy, especially in correspondence around determination or decision letters. So likewise, with any scheme that has eligibility criteria, people will fall outside those parameters, and how they are treated should follow the principles of a trauma-informed approach. So operationally, staff have said that more support and consideration upfront would have helped and been beneficial when navigating those difficult decisions and conversations. The scheme has since introduced vicarious or secondary trauma training for staff, which on reflection should have been embedded from the start. So the final case study I'm going to discuss is from Australia, and they have the National Redress Scheme that was set up in 2018 after a public inquiry into child sexual abuse in institutions. There are many similarities with the Scottish redress scheme in terms of design. The Australian scheme gives support to survivors in 3 ways: a financial payment, free counselling and mental health support, and a chance to receive a personal apology from the institution that harmed them. So I suppose a key strength identified in the Australian scheme is the use of a redress support service. This is a special support team that helps survivors all the way through the process. So they can help with filling out forms, explain what happens next, and just be there to listen. And this means survivors don't have to face the system alone. And they don't have to keep repeating their story, which can increase the risk of re-traumatisation. This hands-on support reflects trauma-informed best practice, keeping things simple, safe and survivor-led. So similar to the mother and baby scheme in Ireland, survivors don't have to give oral evidence. Everything is done through written forms, so people don't need to speak in person or relive that trauma in a hearing. However, details of the abuse form part of the written process, and similar to the Scottish scheme, there are various levels of payment based on harm experienced. Victim and survivors who were reluctant to explain what happened to them could receive less financial redress. And what's clear from the Australian scheme is consideration of the support victims and survivors might need, and counselling is available where people can get mental health support for free, including long-term counselling. It's also important to note that those services are designed to suit different cultures and communities. So it's not just about assuring access to counselling in remote or rural regions. It's also about training and recruiting Indigenous counsellors. So, for example, counsellors working with survivors from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities can offer culturally safe and appropriate services that reflect their histories, which could consider the lasting impact of the stolen generations policies and racism too. In the Australian scheme, survivors can ask for a personal apology from the institution involved, and as the literature says, a personal apology can be a powerful act of accountability and validation, important elements of a trauma-informed approach. They can also help decide what kind of apology they want. It could be written or spoken, so it's done in a way that feels right for them. And feedback suggests this helps survivors feel heard and seen and gives them some control over proceedings. But there are criticisms of the scheme, especially around the maximum payment cap. So survivors and advocacy groups have consistently argued that the cap of $150,000 Australian dollars does not match the lifelong impact of institutional child sexual abuse. And in comparison, civil cases in Australia have sometimes resulted in much higher settlements, leading some survivors to feel that redress to the scheme is unfair or insufficient. So a trauma-informed approach should help empower victims and survivors, and some feel pressured into accepting a lower amount because they can't afford to go to court, or maybe don't have the time and resource that route can demand. So in closing, I hope that these 2 case studies, alongside the other ones in your paper, give you a sense of what a trauma-informed approach can look like in practice and where the key challenges and criticisms tend to arise. I suppose these kinds of redress schemes involve difficult decisions at every stage, from design to delivery, but what the literature tells us is that the guiding focus should always be on doing no harm, reducing the risk of re-traumatisation, and most importantly, empowering victims and survivors with dignity, choice and support. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Annabel. If I could just start off by asking, when you talk in the paper and in your report on non-oral approach, is that in individual applications, or is that in the inquiry stage where we would be receiving testimony?
Oh, so for your committee stage, or for your call for evidence, there is a case study in the paper, and that's to do that comes from talking to the Clerk team in the Scottish Parliament on how they approached it. In terms of how the I suppose the different redress schemes approached it, they primarily, in terms of assessing eligibility, tried to use oral evidence as a last resort. And that's because they wanted to reduce this risk that kind of telling that story in person would traumatise someone again. So But what was really important, I suppose, is giving choices. So you are going to get some people who will want to come and tell their story. I suppose one thing to perhaps note, Chair, is that in the committee stage, it has to be made very clear that if they are coming to give oral evidence, that is not to assess as part of a scheme. And it can be quite complicated. You're coming into a very formal setting, and it's just been very clear, and that was the example that the Scottish Parliament case study sets out, which has been very clear of what people are coming to do and what the outcome of that might be.
Okay, and one other question. On the Scottish one, it talks about, in the paper, financial and non-financial redress. So, I've always understood the term redress to mean a financial payment. Do you know what that means by non-financial redress?
Yes, so similar to the Australian scheme, people could request an apology from the institution that caused them harm. So that would be an example of a non-financial redress. And I believe the case is the same in the Scottish scheme. They could request that apology. And once again there, the important thing is providing that choice. So they can either get it in a written apology, or they can get in person.
Right, just people who just wanted that acknowledgement as such.
Exactly, yeah. I think what the literature says about trauma-informed approaches is that there is a need for, I suppose, validation, and that process can help, I suppose, form a part of healing. So it would be it's that's why the Australian scheme adopted it, and likewise the Scottish one as well.
Okay. Are any other members wishing to raise any questions? No, not at this stage. Okay, Annabel, thank you for your time. Sorry if we kept you waiting a while.
Where are you from?
As we're getting through other business. Okay, so that's fine then. And I don't think we've any actions then arising from that paper. Okay, that's fine. Then we're going to move on then, members, to correspondence. So I refer members to pages 182 to 183 of the pack for a summary of the committee correspondence. I'm going to refer to some of these. Hold on a second. So 10.3, the AARC committee, review of the Assembly Committee engagement on cross-cutting executive strategies. At page 195.
Could I just I'm on the ARC, sorry, I should have declared an interest, but it doesn't really matter.
Note that under declarations of interest. So page 195 to 199 of the meeting pack, just to advise members that the AARC have recently agreed to undertake a review of Assembly Committee engagement on cross-cutting executive strategies. Proposal for this review topic originated from the Executive Office. The terms of reference for the review are attached in Annex A of the correspondence. As part of its calls for evidence, AARC would be interested to hear about the committee's views and experience of scrutiny of cross-cutting legislation, including post-legislative scrutiny, where there are requirements for the executive and departments to report on the implementation or impact of cross-cutting legislation. So we will ask members to note this item of correspondence and seek their agreement to send any response or comment to the Clerk by Friday the 20th of June to allow the committee to consider a draft response at its meeting on the 25th of June. Is that agreeable? Yes, thank you. 10.4 from NIO, response to committee correspondence on the 13th of May. Refer members to page 200 to 207 of the meeting pack. Advise members that a response has been received from the NIO to the committee's correspondence of the 9th of May regarding a potential briefing by the NIO to committee regarding the government's approach to Northern Ireland legacy issues. So NIO have indicated they are not able to facilitate a private briefing until mid-July to ensure that the Secretary of State is first able to provide evidence to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. So we would ask members to note this item of correspondence and seek members' agreement to write to the NIO to suggest that the 10th of September as a potential date for the oral briefing, as this is the first meeting back after the summer recess. Is that agreeable? Yes, thank you. 10.8, which is page 217. Sorry, hold on a second. So that's a letter from the TEO on the Northwest Development Fund. Advise members that a response has been received from the department to the committee's correspondence of the 25th of March requesting an update on the work of the Northwest Development Fund, asking why funding allocations provided by the Irish Government were not match funded and seeking assurances on the future of the current structures. The Department have outlined the funding received and future plans to support the Northwest structures in the correspondence. In terms of the current outputs from the NWDF, as the additional funding allocation that was provided by the Irish Government, TO do not have information relating to the outputs of that funding. So we ask members to note this item of correspondence and seek members' agreements to write to the Irish Government to seek further information on the current outputs of the NWDF, as the additional funding allocation was provided by them. Is that agreeable? Yes, thank you, members. 10.9 and 10.16, the Committee for Education and the DERA Committee on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls refer members to pages 221 to 224 of the briefing pack and pages 16 to 17 of the tabled pack. Advise members that the committee has received responses from the Education and DERA committees to our correspondence of the 31st of March in relation to Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Advise members that all statutory committees have now responded. Ask members to note this item of correspondence and seek members' agreement for the Clerk to compile a briefing note on those responses, highlighting key themes for the committee to consider at its meeting on the 25th of June. Is that agreeable? Okay. 10.10, which is Claire, is your proposed private members bill on age discrimination relating to goods, facilities and services. So we'll note you're declaring an interest, Claire, on that matter. So I don't know if you want to provide a very brief overview of your proposed bill, or we have your letter anyway.
I can if members wish to hear it, but it's really just to let the committee know that I'm currently at public consultation stage, and when that comes to an end, which is actually next Friday, I'll be in touch with the committee to sort of take it to the next stage of the process. But it's really just about extending that area of law to Northern Ireland, in the area of goods, facilities and services. And I know I've contacted some of you individually to speak with that, but I think my engagement with the committee is more appropriate after the consultation closes. But happy to take advice from the clerk on that.
Okay. Well, if I ask members to note that item of correspondence, seek members' agreement to agree to write to the department to ask whether the TEO has any views or comments on the proposed bill and whether there are any implication or any role for TEO arising from it. Is that agreeable, members? Yep. Okay. And members can consider this item further when the consultation summary is published and final consideration is or is not approved by the Speaker. 10.13, pages 237 of the meeting pack, which is TEO update on the Office of Commissioner, COSICA, Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse. Advise members at TEO have wrote to the committee to update members regarding the decision on whether the office, the COSICA office, should continue as required by the HIA-NI Act 2019. The Act requires that FM and DFM must every 5 years commission an independent person to review the operation of COSICA. Professor Alex Alexis J. was commissioned to undertake this review and submitted her final report and recommendations in February 2025, which are detailed in the correspondence. Having considered the report as well as advice from officials, FM and DFM have agreed the recommendations outlined in the report. As such, they have determined that Cossiga will continue to operate for a further period of 2 years to December 2027 and will remain as a non-departmental NDPB. This will allow Ministers time, as recommended by Professor J, to determine whether or not the role of the Commissioner should be widened. So I ask members to note this item of correspondence. Seek members' agreement to write to the Department to ask that they share the full report with the Committee. And before bringing Timothy in, remind members that the Committee also wrote to the Commissioner Fiona Ryan on the 6th of June to arrange an oral evidence session with the Committee.
Just on the basis of that, I note it's not included in the forward work programme, but I'd certainly be very keen to try and get Fiona Ryan here to give an update to committee, especially based on what we have in front of us.
That was just last week, I think, then, that we wrote.
We wrote to her on Friday, Timothy, so once she comes back and we've got a date, we can then add it to the forward programme.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye out for that, and we'll give them a week or two to reply, but you'll chase it up.
Absolutely. Before summer recess, we'll have a date.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Page 253, 1014 TEO response to correspondence. Listing of assets held by TEO. Advise members that a response has been received from the Department to the Committee's correspondence on the 14th of April, requesting a list of assets held by TEO along with details on the cost for implementing health and safety measures, the associated management costs and any usage plan for these assets. This information has been provided for Regional Government Headquarters, Ebrington Properties, North South Ministerial Council, Joint Secretariat, Armagh, Communities in Transition, Spectrum Centre Belfast, Office of the Northern Ireland Executive Bureaus, or Executive in Brussels, Washington and China, and Linham Chambers, AGNI. The final costs for these buildings and land assets will also be published in the Department's annual report and accounts for 2024-25. Ask members to note this item of correspondence and seek members' agreement to write to the Department and ask that they keep the Committee updated on the Regional Government Headquarters following completion of the work with the Historical Environment Division to determine options for future use. Let me see. Advise members, you wish to note, our members agree that we note that matter of correspondence? Agreed. Thank you. Some other matters, I think the Clerk is going to read into the record for us.
Just the wish to note the following items: correspondence 10.2, the NI Human Rights Commission invitation to launch on new independent research report, the environment, human rights and the Windsor Framework on the 24th of June. Any member wishing to attend can register in the link provided in the invitation. Item 10.5, which is NIO response to the Committee's correspondence on the 16th of May in relation to the application deadline for Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme. Item 10.6, TEO response to the Committee's correspondence on the 11th of April regarding ending violence against women and girls and the Balmoral Show 2025. Item 10.7, TEO response to the Committee's correspondence of the 9th of May in relation to the appointment of commissioners and members of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression. Item 10.11, TEO response to the Committee's correspondence of the 16th of May regarding the Victims Payment Scheme. Item 10.12, Department of Justice response to Committee's correspondence of 15th of May, also in relation to the Victims Payment Scheme. Item 10.15, the Committee has been copied into correspondence from the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology to the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee, Regulation EU 2023-2411 on the protection of geographical indications for craft and industrial products, and amending Regulations EU 2017-1001 and 2019-1753.
Okay. Members, thank you, Keith. Members, are there any correspondence you wish to discuss from those? They're all noted then, thank you. Moving on then to the draft forward work programme, refer you to pages 259 to 262 of the pack for an updated forward work programme. The Assistant Clerk will talk through the changes to the forward work programme.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just in relation to next week. Members be aware an email is sent about an informal meeting next Tuesday to discuss the inquiry report. So the inquiry will go on the agenda formally for next Wednesday on the 18th of June. And also just a change into next week. So the committee needs to formally request to get the Delegated Powers Memorandum from the Examiner Statutory Rules in relation to the bill. And that now will take place on the 10th of September. So if the committee are content, we will formally request that.
Okay, members agreed? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's everything.
Okay, thank you, Assistant Clerk. Item 10, any other business? Is there any other business anyone wishes to raise? No. Okay, and last item then, date, time, place of next meeting. Next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 18th of June, 2 o'clock here in room 30. And we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Committee room 30, sound. 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 Committee room 30, sound.